Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Houlihan.
Hey everyone, my name is Mark Thomas, and we are the co-founders of Evo3 Sports. So tonight we're actually talking about serving and offensive systems. We hope that you get a little bit out of it, since I think we differentiate on some things here and there. So I'm super excited for the conversation, in and of itself.
Please follow us at Evo3 Sports on all social media platforms, as well as www.evo3sports.com. Hope you enjoy.
All right, how's it going, man?
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. So tonight we have offensive systems and serving systems.
You gonna have your
Um,
offense on or your defense?
Here we go. We're already get started that way, huh? But speaking of offense, so for me, I have to look at things systematically, and our athletes change every year. Our opponents change every year, and so I guess first question for you would be, does your offensive system change based upon the athletes that are in your program, or is it more so you have a set offensive system and you expect your athletes to kind of fall in line with that?
Obviously, I think at some level we have to adjust. I mean, if we don't adjust year to year, I mean, you're not doing what our whole company is built on, is that right evaluation kind of process and trying to get better with it. But so yeah, I think, I mean, for my time at UMass, even under Terry and by myself, I mean, we have run so many different offenses, from 5-1s to 6-2s, and then tri middles to non-tri middles. I mean, it's really about taking that time early in the season and understanding what do you have and how do you kind of play around with pieces to make yourself better and make yourself balanced. I think that's a huge part that not everyone really thinks about. They kind of shove their best hitters in certain areas, things of that nature. But I feel like you really do have to adjust to your current team um, every year. And man, is it tough sometimes to adjust from something one year, like if you're really offensive and then you're huge passing wise the next, things of that nature. But I mean, I'm assuming you have to do the same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always been looking at things with a clean slate every year. Um, when I was young in the game as a coach, I definitely saw myself more so trying to dictate offensive systems that I felt would be the most successful, based off of almost our opponents in our conference. Hey, this is what could work against all of our opponents. We need to have that in our system. And I just realized that I'm spending way too much time focused on them and not enough time focused on us, and what those key components could be within a modified system year to year that makes you successful. You know, I constantly get the question, what's your favorite offensive system to run? Are you a 5-1? Are you a 6-2? And I'll be honest, I do not have a favorite offensive system. I'm not sitting there saying, oh man, I really wish that I could run a 5-1. My response to that every time is whatever system is going to help us win, that's the system I want. Whatever the system is that's going to help, maximize the strengths of our team, that's the system I want. I mean, for crying out loud, there was one year that I went to you and I was trying to figure out how to utilize a tri-middle system for our women's volleyball program at the collegiate level as a Division III school. And that worked out so incredibly well for us that season. I mean, there were times where teams were coming up to us or coaches and just being like, what is that system that you're running? How many times coaches were yelling at officials and being like, they're out of rotation. And I'm just cracking up because we're not. You just have no clue what it is that we're doing, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's another part of it. I think another part of it is if you can find a way to confuse your opponent, I really enjoy that. And so more often than not, just that little confusion causes delay in their defensive systems. And if there's a delay, there's an opportunity to take advantage of it. So. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the luxuries though that we have as college coaches is that recruiting piece. Obviously,
Right.
when you look at clubs and things of that nature, is there something that you would recommend them to run more than not? Or like what's your thoughts on that? Because we have that element to it that we can try to at least find some players that fit. Try middles are hard to fill now, but I mean that actually alone though can get me to scream to maybe some clubs or some younger players is to try to keep your players in the game, right? And
Yeah, I think for me, it's always been if there's recommendations as to what clubs should be doing, it's creating versatility in their athletes. I'm, it's tough to say what they should be doing at the
of
club
course.
level, but for me, it's also at the same time saying, if there's versatility in their offense and what they're capable of attacking, that actually helps them just transition a little bit
Hmm.
faster into the collegiate game.
Hmm.
The common theme that I get in my first week or two of meeting with athletes in preseason, especially first years, is the game is just so fast. I feel like a deer and look in headlights, and I feel so slow right now, and it's really getting those athletes adjusted to the tempo of the game.
Hmm.
And so if there is a recommendation, it's trying to get athletes to be comfortable hitting first tempo if possible. And I know it's super challenging to push that in clubs, especially if it's not connecting and they can't utilize it in their matches and in their tournaments because they're trying to win too.
Yeah.
I
Oh yeah.
understand that. But if there is one recommendation for me, it is two recommendations would be trying to push tempo with their athletes and helping their athletes hit more than just what it would be in their specific position. Because
Hmm.
how many times have you as a coach gotten a player and said, you know what, I'm not sure if you're going to be this outside, but you could be a pretty dynamic right side. What if you're an undersized middle and I need you to be that pin? And so I
Yeah.
think if there is a recommendation for me, it's just trying to increase those athletes' abilities to hit more than just what's in their positional realm.
Yeah. Oh, I agree 100%. And I think you're right. I think it's about that versatility part and being able to do things outside their quote unquote realms that they have. But I think a next step to that though is understanding how to do that. I mean, we were just both at high performance this weekend and understanding rotations, right? Understanding how to manipulate them is something that we really need to kind of keep pushing out there and keep pushing more and more people. And we did it this weekend, Mark and I, as with our select group. And man, by just explaining the purpose of them, and you saw their eyes kind of light up. And we had them out on the court making some pretty big movements that you normally wouldn't see someone that young. I mean, we're talking
Right.
seventh and eighth graders manipulating lineups, telling us whether or not they're right or wrong. I mean, the younger you can start that and the younger you can make people understand that movement is good. I mean,
For
creating that
sure.
movement is great. And we're going to obviously talk about stuff like that later, but understanding it at such a young age is going to be critical to it. But
I agree.
I, I mean, obviously, I think for the most part, we both agree on this point. So let's get to the stuff we disagree on, maybe.
Okay,
Or
let's do it.
so obviously, yes, you have to mold to the players you have, right? But there's got to be some staples in there that define it, like your offense. I mean, there has to be.
So there are. I think first and foremost, one thing that you'll hear me preach constantly is I am big on establishing middles early in matches and then working my way out to the pins.
Is that because you're a
Um,
middle?
Partially, I'm sure there's some sort of bias in there. However, I also have seen what it can do for those athletes that are receiving a majority of your sets. If an opponent's doing their job, they're going to try to keep you out of system with serving, right? And so For me, it's a matter of teaching our setters and our middles how to create that spacing so that way we can still force middles,
Mm-hmm.
which will open up opportunities for the pins. That's a big part for me. I think where you and I would differentiate is I actually really push back row attacks as a part of my in-system offense. And the reason for that is, again, I'm all about trying to open up as many one-on-ones as I possibly can. And so with the offenses that I've ran so far, by pushing back row attacks, I've seen success open up for the pins because there is that slight hesitation of, well, is this ball going back row even though it's a perfect pass? And just within that half second of processing that in their eye sequence,
Yeah.
whether you're front or back row, I'm creating some sort of gaps in that block. So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. And I think for us, we'll utilize that backcourt when we can, when we have to adapt to it. But for me, I got some things that like tempo, man. We don't touch tempo. Every year we are pushing that tempo. Um, and it's funny because people think that tempo happens really when you're out of or in system, but I mean you can push that tempo like you're talking about out of system as well. And for us, and it all depends. I think you're right in terms of the opening segment of the game has to be to middles, but I think again that to me is something that is a little bit different. It depends. I mean, if your offense is based out of your middles, then it's not really the beginning of the game. It's go until you get stopped. I mean, kind of deal. That's really what it has to come
that's
down
the
to.
other
I
side
mean,
of it.
yeah, I
Yep.
mean, like obviously at minimum, I would love to hit run first 10 points worth 10 to 10, get those middles going, get them to become a threat. I think that's a huge part of it, but obviously there's a lot out of your control in terms of serving and passing. Can you pass well enough in order to push it? Are threes really going to become a huge weapon off the kind of off the net a little bit? I mean, that really depends. Me though, every year, regardless of what we do, is we create combinations, we create these things, but it seems like one thing that we do every year is we create them at sharp angles. That's huge for us. We're all about, it's like you said, causing confusion, right? We want to
Right.
cause confusion and not only by creating movement but we want to create movement and have other hitters coming off players' shoulders rather than doing any looping. I think the moment you pass, so like a lot of people run combos, and I think the moment that you pass a middle, people know what that is. We want combos that really can kind of catch you off guard, right? It's like
Yeah.
that stack ball that turns into an inside 1.5, like, or it's that 32 3 ball that turns into a 3-2, like. And I know the one that we differ a lot on is the slide. The slide. Did you
For
happen to
sure.
catch the video I sent you?
No, I didn't.
That's all right. We'll talk about it right now. Um,
Okay.
that slide, I love it going towards a one ball. You should. I mean, I'm all about you have to start that one ball because again, you just freeze and then you create that sharp angle away.
Are you talking about the
Now,
slow motion video? I did see that one. If that was one you were talking about. Yeah.
yeah, and you saw that middle just like kind of deer in headlights. And it's all because that first step, that sharp movement in one direction and exploding out to another movement makes anybody, any blocker, a step or two behind them. Or the opposite, like, I mean, we're jamming up the 32s and threes, right? Everyone loves the 32s, threes as a blocker because it's a simple block. It's everyone just kind of jumps up. But the moment you take that sharp inside step, now the main thing is you're forcing the middle to make the decision quick. And if the
Right.
middle decides wrong, you got a gap there that's pretty big and pretty able. And that's something that we want to make sure we always put into our system because it's again that creation of decisions. And we always talk about it defensively. We're trying to eliminate decisions, where offensively, we're trying to put as many decisions on the people on the other side of the net that they have to make them like that. and those sharp angles and no looping. We don't loop here. That's something we don't loop. We don't loop on slides. We don't loop on twos. I mean, the longer you can hide it, and we always talk to our hitters about be out of vision. Don't be in a blocker's vision, right? If you can hide behind a big middle, they don't know if you're going to take a step outward or a step inward, and that makes a big difference, especially if you're running tempo.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And well, so it's kind of funny. The way that I've been looking at the slide has been more so modifying it depending upon the scenario. So if it's tempo I'm looking for, so for example, if I have a middle that can hit a really fast tempo slide, I'm not going to be so honed in on that first jab step like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm of the mindset of, well, if we're pushing the slide that fast, that mill's not going to close. If they are, that's one, incredibly impressive. But also two, I'm looking at that from a systematic standpoint of, okay, now they're biting, they're gone. Set the go, or set the hut, or set a bic because the mill's already taking off, right? So I almost look at it from a, well, what are they going to do with this? If it's a fast tempo slide, I might just say go, right? Sometimes there might be that first step that might slow them down. If it's what I would call more of an in-system slide, it's not looping or anything like that. It's a traditional slide. I guess I would kind of define it. That's where I would probably take that jab step and then go. Or if I have a middle that is so strong at slides and I know that our opponent's game plan is to just try to shut that thing down,
Mm-hmm.
that's where I might incorporate that first step jab towards the setter. So that way they do hesitate, like you're saying, to avoid them from closing. So there's little ways that I've been trying to almost look at slides from a strategic standpoint instead of saying, hey, this is the way that we're going to run slides every time. I've even had situations where for some reason there's just middles that really struggle with that first step, trying to get out and then getting strong contact on the ball. But if you tell them just go, find it, chase it, and then get on top of that ball, and they can crush it, right? And then all of a sudden they're hitting at such a higher percentage. So I've been almost modifying what it is. Sometimes there's middles that are running so fast of a slide and they're too far ahead of the ball. Those are the middles that I'm saying, yeah, you definitely need to take a jab towards the center every time. So
Yeah.
it really has been modified for me depending upon the middle, depending upon the tempo that we're running, and then essentially depending upon our game plan though too. Because if they're going to continue biting on that slide every time because they're not stopping, because it's so obvious that they're running the slide, and then we can set somewhere else, that might be helpful to us. So it really just depends.
Yeah. I think to me, I understand what you're saying. Not everybody can kind of hit that footwork, especially early on. I think though, for me, it really depends on a couple of things too. I mean, 5-1 or 6-2. I mean, 5-1, you could take that kid and do the loop, obviously but if you got right sides over there, you got to clear some space for them. You got to, I mean,
as quick as possible.
And that's the thing. I mean, unless you're running them in on Bs and ones, which we do, we'll slide around Bs and ones off of a right side. But unless you're really kind of trying to, essentially, you have to give them that space to work with if they're going to come around when you do slides, things of that nature. And I always found that if you kind of get them into the habit of going up and then out, it allows for more kind of situations to happen on that 8-foot line area where you can start now creating movement prior to the slide completely clearing off. So that's really, I mean, for me, the big part. But for us too, I think one thing, I think you're right when you talk about your back courts. Again, whether we're really including them in system offense or not, I think for me, I think it's obviously dependent on type of player that you have back there. Is it going to be a better free ball? Is it going to be or down ball type of situation? But man, I hate setting out of system bigs or out of system backcourt at all. Percentages wise, it's literally just you need to pump the ball to the outside. That's how I see it. I think the percentages when you're going cross court the best you can to an outside going 5-5 at least, I think you create more movement, create more windows where that high backcourt ball that you have to save yourself in out of system. I think it's just a blocker's kind of dream. It's a backcourt kind of playing inward type of situation where when you pump it outside, you have to keep that setter kind of spot on the spot where they got to play that ball on defense. But I'm a huge, huge backcourt player only out of system. Or excuse me, I'm a huge backcourt player only in system.
In
Never
system,
out.
right?
Never
right.
out.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it really depends, like you're saying, on the player, because I've had some really versatile back row attackers in the past for outsides that just find a way. They have a really strong ability to control the ball, past 10-foot line. And I've also had some outsides that really struggled without a system that is truly, 20 feet off the net. But it comes down to, again, your players and how you train how the system works though too. There's big components to that. It's, do they have that ability to stay behind the ball, or is it honestly better to just try to push that ball on or around the 10-foot line for a pipe, and they can get a good, good swing on it. It kind of changes depending upon the team for me. However, in system attacking from the back row has been something that systematically I've always been able to utilize, and it's been relatively successful. So, yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. How often do you kind of do you train that out of system force play? Do you train because I mean, great teams are in system 60% of the time now. I mean, that's 40% out of system play. I mean, that's got to be a large portion of practice if you're going to do hitting that way. I mean, you really got to force those angles for setters to have to play off of. And for us too, I mean, out of system, we try again to keep that tempo going. I know that's very particular to us, and we'll rather ugly volleyball with tempo than high and over the block kind of volleyball that I mean, that's just the way we are. We're like that. And I guess, do you have to adjust that creativity to in system and out of system? And what are some ways that you adjust creativity to out of system?
Well, that's a good question. So that's something that I think that I've been trying to improve and work on actually throughout the course of COVID-19 and how I want to, change some things about my coaching style. We train out of system way more, significantly more than we are training in system. As irritating as that is for athletes, I just like you're saying, a really strong program is in system 60% of the time. There's 40% of the game you're spending off the net. And so for me, out of system work has always been a part of our practice, training and how we strategize from a game point perspective. But I will say creating versatility and creating, different options, it's really dependent upon the player for me. I've had some players that, you keep them, again, 10 feet off the net, 20 feet off the net, they have the ability to contact high hands, and we've been able to, figure that out. And so we haven't had so much of a dynamic offense out of system, but it's more so us training our athletes on how to hit high hands, how to hit off the block, how to hit deep corners, how to hit specific locations out of system, not necessarily creating a dynamic offense out of system. If there is some sort of dynamic offense out of system for me, again, it is that if a setter is hypothetically running, maybe between to the 4-5 sideline, my back row attackers are still making themselves an option where, the block might not expect that because they're running in that direction. You can see a block shift sometimes, getting ready for a pin attacker in some of those scenarios. And so that's something that I actually was going to ask you about in this video, was how do you create that? Because I know that you and I talk about out of system based upon 60% if you're, a really strong team. But then what about that reverse? And what about that 40%? What if you're only in system 40% of the time?
Yeah,
What
I
are your
mean,
recommendations as to how you create for both?
I've lived in those situations, and it's funny because I think obviously the big thing is of teaching setters to be able to be creative, and then they have to teach things off. And what does that play off look like? And there's some pretty interesting stuff that we've done, and it took a little while to start working, but it worked, man. We obviously, what's the number one set for middles that you do out of system? Probably.
Uh, Probably
Three.
31s.
Yeah,
Yeah,
31s, right? I mean, it's pretty
yeah.
good. You can open yourself up as a hitter, but man, does it become predictable? I mean, so what we've done off of those is we've had middles start at that 31 position and run a two-step slide into the middle and
Okay,
run it at a two
gotcha.
ball tempo. We've done those things where it's a little higher and it allows them to, again, it's those looks, right? Big sharp, two steps in, cross court back to the setter spot, setter corner. I mean, we've done things
Yeah.
like that. Another situation that we had to counter, we had to figure out a couple of years ago. Man, we were out of system a lot, and we were doing what I was talking about. We're pumping fours, right? Are really tempo, but to the four spot. And man, I mean, you saw like a lot of our tape. We saw like those middles just draw, 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 and what we started doing then is actually having the setter pretty much again set right off her shoulder to the right side, 4 feet inward, and finding that gap, hitting that gap. And it's a tough angle. I mean, you have to have a versatile hitter at that point. Obviously, a lefty would be so much better coming in as that lefty slide that you guys used to run down in Springfield. I mean, um, but for me, it's about, again, creating those new looks, especially if you're in that reverse. If you're only in system 40% of the time, man, you have to create new looks other than that 4-3-9 that you kind of see all the time and that backcourt down ball that you see all the time. And if you can create some new options that, again, the big purpose of it is to get the block back to being honest.
Right.
Really what it's about. It's about allowing that ball being pushed to the four spot in tempo to have an opportunity, be able to hit high hands and hard. And if you take those, if you don't provide other options and other kind of creative, mysterious type of ways, then that's going to start becoming honed in on too much. And I mean, that's how we try to tolerate a little bit of out of system.
Yeah. So one thing that I look more towards that now, especially with potential rule changes, of setting, right? And not talking about rotations on the ball anymore or anything like that.
Athletic.
It's really, yeah, an athletic play, quote unquote, it's up to the discretion of the official to claim whether it's a double on a setter or not. I actually feel that out of system is going to get faster with that rule change if it does go through. You're training it well in advance and you're working on that every single day. I actually think that eventually the trend is going to get to that point because of these rule changes. You're going to have some flexibility. You're going to be able to take a little bit more risk. And with that, it becomes a faster tempo game. It's more exciting for fans to watch, but it's that much faster, being involved in it. And so I think that if I'm going to help our athletes prepare for that, but also be able to utilize that, I do eventually want to evolve into that scale where I'm making my out of system sets a little bit faster, not using the excuse of out of system to try to slow it down. Because in reality, when it is out of system, it's a win for the defense if you're running a high level offense. And so that's something that, like I said, right before we start talking about this out of system part, I've been working at throughout the course of, COVID in 19 and trying to figure out how can I incorporate that from a technical standpoint and from a philosophical standpoint though too. So definitely looking into it.
One thing I mean, if you're going to try new things, man, from day one, try having your backcourt setters work on dumps from 5 feet off,
Okay.
just pushes. I mean, and then that way you can spread out into that 4-3-9, and now you're in that 5 feet off spot. A quick push over makes that middle have to think, make the defense have to shrink in, and I mean that widens your backcourt up for those that
For
three
sure.
ball that widens up. So you briefly touched on it though. So let's talk about actual like more philosophies, right? Offense. We talked about creativity. What are some philosophies like for us too? Like I guess we talked early on, middles, early on. Like, do you have anything like in terms of first part of the set, second part set, back end of the set? Do you do anything like philosophy wise with that?
Yeah, I think ever since playing in college, I kind of started evolving that and what that looks like for me. Um, the first 10 points, again, I really do try to establish that middle presence. And then after, that 10th point going from 10 to 20, that's where we start to create this balance, but also evolving into more of a pin to pin type of dynamic. Because in those first few rotations, if they're talking about that, first timeout possibility, if they're going against me, probably talking about how much we're establishing the middle. So then from the next 10 points, now we're evolving it into a more pin to pin because we established that middle so much. And then when it comes down to the last 5 points, I've always had this great debate year to year as to whether I want to go with whoever's the hot hand. Hey, give them, like, whoever is crushing it in this set, we need to get them the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you get it to your go-to attackers? Whether they're having a tough set or not, they're the ones that are accustomed to, in crunch moments, you can depend on them to be the most consistent presence that you have. For me, it's really changed year to year. One year I said, all right, it's the hot hand. No matter what, it's the hot hand. But then I've had times where that hot hand is full-blown exhausted, especially if it's out of their
Second
role.
second tier like swings per set kind of
Yeah.
person.
Yeah, like if they're that OH2 that they're not accustomed to getting tons of sets, but then all of a sudden it's on them, they could be full blown exhausted by the end of that set. And so it's really varied year to year for me for those last 5 points. Sometimes it's going to be, hey, the hot hand, whoever it is, give it to them because they're still crushing it. They're on a roll. But then there's been times where those last 5 points, you're looking at your go-to attacker and saying, all right, it's your time to close this out, put this away. And they want that. It's who wants the ball at the end of the set. I know everyone says they do, but you really want to put it in the hands of the person that's going to help you win that set. So it's really changed and kind of modified for me. How about you?
We're a little different. I mean, so we set up a little differently. One thing that we talk about with our setters is how do you go from checkers to chest?
Right.
That's what we talk about. And I feel like that's talked about a lot, right? But for us, it's how do you go from checkers to chest without people knowing that you're not
Right.
playing checkers? We want everyone in the world to think we're playing checkers when we're playing chess. So our big thing is we open up with, we always say it's the first 7 points, 8 points, and that's going to our best swings. And we're going to see what
Okay.
type of matchups are they're looking at. We're going to evaluate their matchups, evaluate what those are going to look like. And then that middle part, right? The next 10 to 12, that's about playing checkers. And our goal is to set up the final set, the final piece of that set. We want to play check. We want to be talking to our setters constantly. Why are you running this? What is it going to open up for you? And
Right.
it kind of goes back into those types of slides. It's like, it's the boom out to the setter, out to the setter, out to the setter, out, boom, one, right? Right. It's create movement, create movement, create movement, create none. Like it's those, what are you doing? I mean, how do you take one play and design it for something 10, 11, 12 points down the road. And so that our final points of that, it's new looks with our best players. And it's how are
Okay.
those plays setting up our best players? How are those plays setting new looks, but they look the same? So we always want to do stuff like that. So towards an end of a set, you're either going to, I mean, it might not even be new plays. It actually might be a new rotation, same play, or new setup, same play. So I know this
Right.
weekend we talked a lot about, right, stacking and creating movement all game, stacking three hitters in that row two and create that kind of movement. And then out of nowhere, just overload one side, right? Last five, we're overloading two blockers with three hitters out of that same setup.
Right.
Or vice versa, be running that same setup, um, all stacked in there, set up differently, draw that pin player out, and then be able to do the exact same play from a new angle.
Okay.
This is how we do our, we want you to think it's that we want you to think we're still playing checkers, and then out of nowhere, the last 5 points, you just either you got to adjust like that, or the set's over. And that's how we try to. At least we try to. I mean, it doesn't work all the time, but man, that's the big concept that we talk about is give me 1 to 2 plays that can set something up so the end of the game becomes what their reactions are going to be, and now you're going to play against that. And that's really too, I mean, that's where we kind of again talk about all those, I mean, again, so you talk about it as the middles draw the blocks in and then we can go pin to pin on them. I'm talking about making something look like it's going to be the same and having a completely different pattern to result.
Well, and that's if you look at the game from a, a lot of coaches will even keep track of the plays that they're running and who you set in your offense, so that way you can be less predictable in the second half of a set. I've seen that in the past,
Yep.
and so I definitely see the positivity in that, because when it push comes to shove, especially when it's a tight last 5 points or tight last 7 points, you want to show them something different.
Mm-hmm.
I just look at it at a different way, where for me, it's those last 5 points, I want to go with something that we're comfortable in, that I know we're going to be able to execute. Does that make it more predictable? 100%. 100%. I'm not going to sit here and say that it doesn't. I'm just of this standpoint of, well, if something's working, why go away from it?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where I look at those things. I also, again, I think every coach modifies things based upon things that have happened to them in the past. And I just have seen for myself in the programs that, I've been a part of, because I will be honest, we don't train that way. We don't train in the manner of, okay, well, we're going to run this, and all of a sudden, like the last 7 points, you have to come up with something different. I've always been more so, okay, we need to go back to what it is that has been successful, so that way we know the likeliness of that happening is going to be high. But I do see, I see it complete opposite ways. There's a positive in both. I really do feel that. But it is funny, when we come from offensive philosophies, how dramatically different philosophies are in this game for us as coaches. We're looking at this as complete the spectrum. I go with consistency, and you go with consistency for the first half of a set, and then you change it, right? Now it looks like it's going to be the exact same thing. We're lined up the exact same way. It looks like for those first few steps we're running the same thing, and then when you flip it, now they don't know what's going on. They don't know where they're going. I love both. It's just kind of funny to see how both of us just look at it with different lenses. So.
Yeah. No, I think it I mean, it does. It takes a long time to develop. It's a year-long type of process, and that's the thing. It looks different to other people. It looks normal to us, and I think that's the tough part. But with that said, I mean, you have to allow creativity within your setters, but B, more importantly, teach how to create things with your setters. I mean,
That's what
and
it
it
comes
goes
down to.
back to that, man, mastering rotations. if my setters can't call another team out of rotation like this, we're going to be doing more work. We're doing more workshops, more stuff. And that's huge, man. And understanding the balance of how to set people up where, I mean, where like you can manipulate it to make it seem like the other team has to focus on you being out of rotation when you're not. That's my
Right.
favorite moment.
Yeah.
So I guess though, we're supposed to talk about serving, and I think this is a good point to it. What philosophies do you have in serving? Like, what's your purpose behind serving? Like, do you have a purpose? I mean, obviously there's a lot of ways to look at it, but what is that purpose that you have behind serving?
So for me, push come to shove, there's different percentages out there. There's different outlooks to serving. My goal has always been to have serving be a part of your offense. And what I mean by that is you should have serving, your serves should be trying to get them out of the system as much as possible. We're not serving to keep the ball in play. That's my thing. I get really irritated with, the lollipop serve or
The 99 percenters?
Yes, yes. How many times have I seen, oh man, I got this jump serve that it has a 98%, success rating of getting in play. But then if I just take 2 steps and I put a platform out there, it's going to be a 3 pass. It's going to be a perfect pass, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it's always come down to, I want our serving to be part of our offense. As an attacker, your job is to keep them out of system with either a hard-driven swing. Sometimes it's a tip because you know that that's going to be successful and they can't run specific things. Sometimes I want to serve to this seam in this location because I know from a percentage perspective, if, maybe the passer in zone 1 is passing this ball, they're going to go to this place 75% of the time. And we want that. We want them to go to that attacker. And so competitive serving has always been big for me. I break up serving now into 2 facets. I break it up into your power serve. Okay. Your power serve is you're going for aces. That's it. Very rarely am I going to give you a location. I'll probably give you a half of the court that I want you to serve towards. That is something that we're trying to go for, making it as challenging as it is, but realistically, we're looking for an ace out of that.
And are you looking for 80%? I mean, success
out of a
rate?
Power serve?
Or 80% in rate?
I look for an 80% in rate on our power serves, but that comes with training. That's not easy to do. When we're talking about we're serving for aces and 80% of those, so 8 out of 10 have to be in.
I mean, are you down?
And do you mean under that?
No, sorry. Are you like down in a match to go to those? Are you up really heavy in a match to go to those? Like,
I typically like to start pretty quick with that. I like also setting up my rotations where if it's not for a matchup perspective, it's for my first server to be the best and most powerful server that we have. Okay. Start the set with a bang. And we know that this is going to help us at least get them out of system, if not create a gap in points that hopefully we can maintain for the rest of the set. So maintaining an 80% in rate for that is tough. Don't get me wrong.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a goal. Whereas our, what I call go-to serve is, this is a serve I know that's going to be in. I start with a 90% success rating. Especially if it's competitive, and I mean truly competitive, keeping them out of system, or we're getting maybe aces in between players, something like that. If I have a server that's in there that, doesn't have as much pace on the ball, I'm probably going to up their percentage up even higher than that. Because, well, if your goal is essentially you're just playing it safe and you're getting that ball in, I'm going to have a higher, in percentage for you. Whereas someone's go-to serve that is consistent but competitive, I'm probably bringing down to like a 90 instead. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I look at it. Is I do want us to be super aggressive. I feel that the more challenging your opponent is, and especially if you're down, why not? That's what you need to get back into games at times,
Yeah.
especially if your offense isn't clicking, especially if your defense has a really low dig percentage in that set or maybe in that match. We have to find a way of getting them out of system so that way it slows the game down for us. So how about you?
So, so I guess though I'm gonna kind of start up. What do you consider out of system?
So for me, at least eliminating three options for them.
Exactly.
We're
Right.
trying to create a place where I know we are eliminating options for them, and then it makes our blocking scheme and our defensive scheme just a little bit easier to read what they're doing.
So I think too, and that's gonna play in a minute. So, but for us, we talk about our serve being offensive and defensive, but at the same time, we need it to be both. And I think we always talk about that. Obviously, when we actually serve, we're all the time that 88 to 90%. We want that. We want pace. We want pace all the time. That's just a philosophy of our program. We want to control as much as we can, and we will take those errors. We are a 2-to-1 team, so we want two aces per error, ideally with an 88 to 90%. Which, if you're accomplishing that, then you're accomplishing a pretty high up out of out of system rate for the other team.
For
Which,
them, absolutely.
and that, I mean, and obviously we don't do that on an everyday basis, but we do try to strive for that, and we will live and die by serving and passing. I've said it before, and it's the type of offense we run. It's that we need to be in system at times, or we have to be out of system almost to feel comfortable at times as well, depending on the year. But with that said, I think the one thing is like that you mentioned is out of system. It's eliminating options. It's not making the setter run around crazy. And I
Right.
think that's what we try to do too. We try to isolate situations. I love running slides, but what I love more than running slides is another team that runs slides against me.
Right.
I have literally served to a two spot the entire match almost just to prevent that player from running slides. They were so good at it. And now you're putting them out of their norm. You have to
Right.
force them to create something new for that player, which they're not as comfortable with. They're comfortable with the slides, they're comfortable with that. And I literally will just have players control dropping twos all day, all day. Or like, and those are the type of situations that you have to utilize your serve offensively. And it's funny because people say we want to be defensive with our serve as well. In terms of, I don't know, a lot of people see it as you want to get them out of system so your defense has an easier shot. But I want to actually be defensive in the fact that I'm going to defend against their options that they have. And I'm going to find a way to utilize the serve to create less options for them.
Right.
And we can do that either by power and putting their setter running around the court like crazy, or you can do that by, I mean, we have strategies. The other part I love is playing against kids that have 30 swings, right? 30 swings, man. We will literally serve a kid every single ball, even if they're
Yeah.
the best passer on the team. Because if you're going to pass 30 balls and then you're going to transition and take 30 swings, we might be in set 5 and you probably can't even handle it anymore.
Exactly. You're exhausted.
And like the amount of times that parents come up to me after the game, like, why did you serve her so much? And it's like, I don't know, she looked tired. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it's, those are the things
Absolutely.
though that people, I mean, the number one thing I think of when you talk to people and is people talk about like trying to find that bad pass or try to find a couple of situations that, it's a wide open gap. You want to hit you want to hit the ball there. But I mean, for me, it doesn't have to be wide open gaps, man. You can just pop it to somebody on purpose. I mean, systematically, I mean, we always talk, and we talked a lot for HPs this weekend, is the four seam, right? We don't call serves 1 through 6. Serving two
Right.
players is typically obviously not really an ideal thing. So there's four seams for the most part when 3-man passing. So we always talk about those seams, and that way when you give a 1, it's not a 1 spot, it's 1 seam. But with that said, though, sometimes that 1 through 6 method is perfect because again, you want to hit someone, fine. I'll throw it right at your belly, force you to play a ball, and force you to wait and transition hard 100 times a match. And then when
Yeah.
it matters, and if we're keeping up, it's going to matter in the end. And I think that's why, for me, it's like serving and has to be offensive and defensive in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I really do see, I see serving as one of the, not serving, serve receive as one of the most mentally challenging pieces of the game if your opponent utilizes it as a part of their offense, quote unquote. Because, I mean, if you're the type of coach that just puts the number out and you know that that's your spot, your seam, or your zone, and it's like, crap, it's coming to me, you're already thinking about that and you're processing it, right? There's that part of it. There's the part of, what I like to do is, especially if I'm starting to see a little bit of success, and this is kind of where I change my offensive, hey, if something's working, we're going to keep on doing it until it dies. That actually changes for me in my serving, where if something's successful maybe 2-3 times in a row, I'm going to change it. So if it's like we're going deep seam 4 right now, and that's been working like 3 times, they're going to expect that to keep happening. Where I'm going to tell them, all right, go short seam 4. They're all going to take that negative step back, and it's going to cause a delay, and it's going to throw them out completely. I could be utilizing the short serve like you're saying. I'm eliminating options because that's what they want to run, but if I put the ball there, they can't. There's little ways to kind of pick apart serving, and I think because I look at it as so mentally challenging from a serve receive perspective, I utilize that as an offensive component of my serving. So
yeah, I love row 2 where you can make that outside pin, serve short to the 4 spot, make the outside pin, run up, run back, run on. I love it.
Brutal.
So make them run. Yeah, I mean, so do you use the 4 seam as well for like how do you call serves, and like, can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
know if everybody knows what we're talking about.
So just recently, I started utilizing, like this past year, we started utilizing seams. So, seam 1 is where the passer in zone 1 is between that passer and the sideline. And then seam 2 is between the passer in 6 and the passer in zone 1. Seam 3 is between the passer in 6 and the passer in 5. And then seam 4 is the passer in zone 5 and that sideline, that 4-5 sideline. So I really like utilizing seams more than zones because, as you said before, more often than not, I'm not trying to serve right at someone. The highest success rate from a passing perspective is midline. And so I really try to go through seams and attacking those seams as much as possible. But it doesn't just stop there. I then will choose whether it's, if it's a true seam, I'm trying to have it go, between 2 passers. I could be calling deep seams 1 through 4, where we're trying to get it in that last third of the court. But then there's also short seams 1 through 4, and maybe we're trying to take something out, or maybe they just really struggle passing that short. And so we kind of break it down into 4 seams, but then there's 3 different avenues within each seam, if that makes sense. Yeah. I love that we modified it and that we changed to that. We've definitely seen a higher ace success rating with that because, even though people have certain passing schemes and wherever the server's serving from, they talk about, all right, seams are, I got your short and I got your deep here. Or sometimes there's coaches that have all seams left, no matter what seams are going to be left. Whatever that may be, passing or serving between 2 passers, or even passing can break down between passing and serving, or serving between a passer on the sideline and they have to make that 50-50 call, whether that ball is in or out. There's just been a higher success rating, not only from an ace perspective, but from an out of system perspective. So.
Yeah. And then we do the same thing. And that's my thing. I mean, coaches like more areas to call. That's really what it comes down to. We go from 6 spots to 9 or to 12, exactly. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Data volley got us to 9 spots and now we're at 12. So,
and now we're just, detailing on that.
So
for sure.
one last thing for me, I want to like, and it's funny how you say like, all right, we're gonna go short one, deep one. I mean, all of that, but in everything we do, I mean, the one thing I do see all over the place, and freshmen come in and they'll try to be so mysterious with their calls or their, or like, coach, everyone can hear what you're saying. And I go, it's okay. Um, that's one thing in our gym. We don't do signs. We just don't. We'll create signs. The players will create them. We don't have any systematic to it. It's really just like if it's too loud type of sign kind of deal. And for us, it's we verbalize everything. We call out plays. We call them out right out of the. I mean, we're walking to our spot or running to our spots. We're calling plays. Serving wise, I'll verbalize it to them. There's a lot of times, and for us, it's just a matter of execute, right? I don't care if
Right.
anybody knows. And someone was talking about a story this past weekend about how on the club scene, someone was stealing your signs or stealing like out of the parents. And all right, that's a little dirty for parents to be doing it. But you know what? It's competition. I mean, but if you're executing, then you can call whatever you want. I mean, just run it right. Make sure you're still making them think and move. And then out of nowhere, pull a fast one on them. Say subtract two on all your serving signs, something like that, if you really want. But for me,
Right.
I don't care who knows it. I mean, if you're a good coach, you're going to scout me, and if you're going to scout me, you're going to know what we're running regardless. Might as well know, and let's just execute.
Yeah, I'm with. I mean, I can definitely see that. I would, just being honest, I do give numbers, and I talk about whether that's short, deep, stuff like that with hand signals.
Mm.
A lot of that originated from, like you were saying, being in gyms that are honestly so loud that you just cannot. The question of what was that, or you screaming at the top of your lungs, or miscommunication. I get really concerned about that. That could just be like the control side of me as a coach being like, no, we need to see what it is that I'm talking about. But I do like giving numbers. I do like even looking at specific passers and having them know. So it's almost like I'm not saying it out loud like you are, but I am looking right at them. And I am giving that call that it is them. But them
Yeah,
seeing me, now all of a sudden they're second guessing it. Just like when you're saying that same seam, they know it's their seam. They're like, okay, well then I have to be ready for that, right? So it does kind of change for me a little bit, especially with my mindset of, 2-3 times that's been working well and then try to change it now. I want to show like, as if we're doing the exact same thing, but we're going to try to shift that. So it really does depend on the coach. I have gone up against other coaches that they have had their hand up at the top, fully extended, zone 5, type deal.
yeah,
And okay, yeah, cool, great. It does. If you're good, you're going to be able to execute and put it there. We pick apart serving, even in our scouting report, I'm showing our team serving tendencies of our opponents. And so they should be anticipating those things anyway. If
mm,
I'm a bad passer, you better believe I have that mentality of, yeah, this ball's probably coming to me. And as
yeah,
a coach, I feel it's your job to also let them know if for some reason they're struggling with that, to get them prepared that, hey, the ball is coming to you. And so I think it just depends on what the coach is most comfortable with. But at the same time, sometimes you can have a little fun just showing it right in front of their face and saying, hey, this is where we're going with it. Get a good pass behind it or don't. That's up to you.
yeah.
So.
So if you were to give kind of, I guess, one last piece of whether it's advice or a thought or a philosophy that you want people to kind of know, offensive, serving, whatever you want, or both, what would those kind of be? What would you suggest out there?
I know that this is ridiculous and it's probably kind of cheesy, and I know it's the name of our company, but you have to evolve. I'm just a big believer in evolving to the strength of your athletes, because it's amazing what you can do if you had that mentality throughout the course of an entire season. So I guess that's the other part of it. Don't get stuck in, well, this worked and this looks like it was going to work really well in preseason and we're doing this and it's working well, and run it the entire season. I actually like to change our offensive system, if possible, halfway through conference play,
Yeah.
because you're being scouted. Your opponents are scouting you. And so if you can change it halfway through conference, based upon the strength of your team still, I just have seen a higher success rate with that. And so being able to evolve based upon the talent in your gym and based upon their strength will go a long way. That's my recommendation. What about you?
Yeah, for me, it's a new game. It's a new time, and unfortunately, in America, with all the subs you get, it's an ugly volleyball now. And for me, it's develop your out of system offense before you develop your in system offense. And I think that's the thing. A lot of people talk about how crazy they make practice so that the real match seems a little bit easier. And I like that philosophy at some levels. Um, but with that said, I think if you have to create your out of system, and you have to create an out of system offense, not just that you're out of system and you go basic. And I think that's just because you have to now. It's just the method of the game. It's the way that passing is kind of developing, especially here in the US. So that's something huge for me. And then after you kind of get comfortable in that craziness, then get comfortable in the easy parts, the in system offense, that stuff. And teach your setters and hitters how to flow from being in system calls to out of system plays that can allow all your hitters to be available. And that's the big thing. And I feel like when people go from in system to out of system, the number one thing we see I see at the club level is a lot of times middles become unusable.
Right.
Teach those middles to become usable and do it in a way that whether it's a two ball, whether it's this delay ball, I mean, whatever it is, just try to make people utilized more. And then the final thing is serving. Have a system onto why you're doing something. You don't have to tell your players that. I mean, I think a lot of times it's overwhelming if players hear too much, especially at younger levels. But I mean, have a purpose to what you're doing and serving wise. Understand what your strategy is and understand that and make it a weapon. A lot of times people just say the serve initiates play. Yeah, well, initiate play how you want it to initiate.
Yeah, you can
Don't
dictate
just
it.
yeah, it's dictate that part of the game. And I think that's huge. And last thing for me, and I know it's more than I said, but teach how rotations work. Teach the relationships, because there's a huge misunderstanding out there that opposites are so important to each other when actually 2/3 of the time they're not.
They're
Actually,
not. Yeah.
they're not important to each other at all,
Right.
other than rotation 2, rotation 3, or excuse me, not rotation 2 and 3. Actually, it's whenever you're opposite in the middle 2 sections, 3 spot and 6 spot. That's when it matters, really. Otherwise, it's who's in
Yeah.
the front court and who's not. But no, I thought this was a good talk.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of different ways to look at the game in every component, right? And so, I mean, for crying out loud, we just talked about so many different variations of things in and out of system, serving, and how we look at that from a philosophical perspective. And so, it really is a matter of utilizing those and dictating the game the way that you want to. You have the ability to do it if you have, like you're saying, a purpose behind what it is that you're doing. So,
I
yeah.
agree. And I think you're right. I mean, it's molded to yourself. It's evolve. It's evaluate currently and make sure that you're doing things the right way. And I think whatever you come up with in the end, it's going to be right. Just make it right for your team. There's a lot of different ways you can do it, and you just got to make sure it's right for the players that you have. Or again, I mean, I hear it all the time. You don't want to fit square peg in a round hole.
Right.
So good talk, man.
All right. Awesome.
All right. I'll catch you next time.
Sounds good, man. Take it easy.
All right. Take it easy.